Hi, Jerry.
Okay.
You want to just introduce yourself and
I'm Jerry Tew. I'm Professor of Mental Health and Social Work at the University of Birmingham, and with colleagues Susie McLagan from Shropshire and Lorna Ferguson and Julie Phillips from Solihull, we presented a workshop around prevention, doing things differently. I was presenting some stuff that we've got from our national research that's funded by the Department of Health, where we're looking, we've done a survey with as many local authorities as would reply to our survey about what it's really like there in terms of the prevention space. And one of the things that we learned quite early on is a number of local authorities don't use the prevention language. It's a language that's in the Care Act, but what local authorities talk about are capacity building or strength-based practice or asset-based practice. And so there was a question of helping them to know what fitted the prevention agenda, but also we ended up just changing the whole title of our project to reflect that language of capacity building rather than the language of prevention, although capacity building does deliver prevention in terms of outcomes. Some of the things that came through with the national survey are, because it's confidential, we get some idea of some of the real barriers to doing this stuff. And some organisations have been so stripped out in terms of management capacity that they've really only got the capacity to deliver what they're doing now just about, rather than have the thinking space to how can we do things very differently and how can we move resources upstream. There's also the issue that in order to move things upstream, quite often you have to invest a little bit more in something before you get the savings further down the line. And again, when you've got declining budgets, that's very difficult to earmark that particular amount of money and say, yeah, that's safe, we can actually carry on investing in that way. On the positive side, a number of people are telling us that the austerity agenda actually is the driver, that is why the council recognises it has got to change, it cannot carry on the way that it is, and therefore is the impetus for new investment. And even for councils where they haven't got much internal capacity to innovate and manage that innovation, there are national networks like the Local Area Coordination Network and the Partners for Change Network, and they can come into local authorities and actually give them the support around innovation, and that seems to be a model that's working well for many local authorities. What we have also picking up is some of the issues when we are looking at, we've got a number of case study sites looking different models across the country. One of the exciting things is just how different these models and approaches are within the local authority sector. People are going on different routes. Broadly speaking, there are some that are focusing on doing social work differently and managing the front-end experience differently and investing much more in these earlier conversations and proper relationships and so on, and are beginning to see real changes in terms of how many people end up in residential care, how many home care hours they're actually using, and so on. Other local authorities are investing more at the community grassroots level in terms of models like local area coordination. And then there are others that are doing innovative things in the space in between. So some local authorities are prioritising families and family relationships, and family group conferencing is one of the models there. And something else that we are very interested in is how people use personal budgets, direct payments, that historically many local authorities used eligibility criteria to mean that the only people that were able to access direct payments were people with critical need, where the direct payment was then to provide a long-term support service, as opposed to using it further up the line to something that may be quite short-term, or even a bit of equipment like a laptop or a bike or something which actually was the thing that would enable somebody to reconnect and get on with their lives. So I was quite interested that direct payments and personal budgets haven't been much more generally part of the conversation around prevention. Also very interested in the way that reablement, which I thought when we did our national survey, people will be jumping out and saying, yeah, we're completely revisioning reablement. It's no longer 6 weeks of home care. We're actually thinking, well, what really do people need to get back on their feet again? And it's much more complicated than that, but we're using reablement. What we find so much is that maybe a local authority that's innovating in other ways, but it's still got a reablement team that's just doing exactly what it was doing 5 years ago, and somehow it's got caught in a time bubble. But I'll be very interested if others are in local authorities where actually people are thinking, oh yeah, we can use reablement, but we can use it in a different way. So quickly looking at the presentations that followed. So Susie McLagan was talking about the journey that Shropshire made from the initial people-to-people community interest company where social workers left the local authority, worked together in a much closer community setting, dispensed with an awful lot of the paperwork and the bureaucracy, and actually encountered the sort of need that people were experiencing in the community and coming up with community solutions. Then there's a big issue of how that was then upscaled within Shropshire, and this theme of you do something very successfully in an innovation site or a bubble, and then you try and scale it up, and you suddenly discover a whole series of problems when you scale up that you didn't have at the start. What Susie was presenting is a journey not without its hiccups, but they have reached a point within the county where they have strong evidence in terms of holding or slightly, well, significantly reducing their demand for long-term residential care, and most of the front-end conversations that they are having are conversations that lead to productive community-based outcomes rather than long-term service. So although I think they're still very much on a journey, and they're still reviewing where they are on the journey and where they're going next for that journey, they're what they now call Let's Talk local hubs do seem to be working, and do seem to be, from an initial resistance from some people in the community who were expecting a different sort of service, now they are really appreciating that if they're able to travel in, and obviously in rural Shropshire travel is a big issue, but if they're able to travel in, they can actually speak to somebody very, very quickly, set up an appointment, have a conversation, which may well result in a good solution, and that's all that they need at that time. The third presentation was from Lorna Ferguson and Julia Phillips from Solihull, and that complemented this rather neatly, because this was looking at the commissioning of services from the third sector and how to bring them into this new way of working. And that was quite challenging, that there is a huge inertia within voluntary sector organisations that think they know what they're doing, they know how to do it, and okay, we're quite prepared to change the language, but actually what we're actually delivering really isn't going to change an awful lot. So what Solihull did was to say, sorry folk, you've got to work in a new way, and you've got to work collaboratively with each other rather than competitively. But then that was rather like herding cats, that actually having senior people from different organisations that were supposed to be working together, some of the old ways of working still emerged. So I think it's a very interesting story of, if you're going to change the overall offer of the local authority, then it's not just about social work, the direct employment side of changing. It is a completely new conversation with external organisations where they can take the initiative and bring new ideas, but they can't carry on getting away with, well, this is how we've always done it and we'll dress it up differently, but we're very resistant to change.
Thank you. Thanks for that.